good to be with you. So the material that we'll be kind of covering tonight contains anti-Semitic thoughts, do you know what I mean? And we need to look at them and be aware that in our own Christian history, there has been a lot of anti-Semitism, and it should not have been, but it actually has shaped it has shaped history. And now we're the people who are carrying the torch now. So we really need to be aware of what has come before, the mistakes that have happened. If you want to call them mistakes, they're really probably sins.
Yes.
And we need to know, we have to be biblically literate, because a lot of what happens in hate speech is emotional, and it doesn't really come from anything rational. Even now, think about when you get into an argument with someone, you're not always arguing rationally. You're not always arguing from facts. You're arguing from emotion. And if hatred is involved, you could say, you're going to say everything. You're going to throw every single possible ugly thing to hurt and to tear down. And some of the things that have been said in Christian history, we're going to look at where all these things come from, but the things that are in the human heart are really the issue. Do you know what I mean? Like, how could we even get to a place where Christians are hateful and say hateful things against the Jews? Do you know what I mean? So let's begin. I want to start at the very beginning. And I'm actually just going to read from the definition of anti-Semitism from Wikipedia. It's actually done pretty well. Anti-Semitism, also spelled anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism, is hostility to or prejudice towards or discrimination against Jews. This sentiment is a form of racism, and a person who harbors it is called an anti-Semite. Primarily, anti-Semitic tendencies may be motivated by negative sentiment toward Jews as a people, or by negative sentiment toward Jews with regard to Judaism. In the former case, usually presented as racial anti-Semitism, a person's hostility is driven by the belief that Jews constitute a distinct race with inherent traits or characteristics that are repulsive or inferior to the preferred traits or characteristics within that person's society. In the latter case, known as religious anti-Semitism, a person's hostility is driven by the religion's perception of Jews and Judaism, typically encompassing doctrines of supersessionism that expect or demand Jews to turn away from Judaism and submit to the religion representing itself as Judaism's successor faith. This is a common theme within the other Abrahamic religions. The development of racial and religious anti-Semitism has historically been encouraged by the concept of anti-Judaism, which is distinct from anti-Semitism. And I'll just stop there with that. So anti-Semitism is a form of racism, but there's hatred against other people groups that is very strong, very hostile, and ends in violence against them. But I think in the case of Israel, there's another factor in the anti-Semitism. There's another factor that is either, I mean, you could say it's a part of racism, but it's really a spiritual issue. And right from the very beginning, in Genesis, when you have the serpent coming, and God is proclaiming a curse upon the serpent. In Genesis 3 and verse 14. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all the livestock and all the wild animals. You will crawl on your belly and you will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. So there is a spiritual force that has come through history that is trying to, like, the Jews are God's chosen people, and through the Jews, salvation comes. The Messiah comes. And so if the devil can stop the Jews, can stop the Messiah from coming, he can thwart the plan of God. So this isn't just any day, every day, like racism. I don't like you because you're Italian. I don't like you because you're French. There is a spiritual force that is trying to destroy the Jewish people through whom salvation comes. And it starts here. And God pronounces this. It's a pronouncement upon the serpent and the spirit working through the serpent, saying that he will crush your head and you will strike his heel, meaning the Messiah. That this enmity will go down through history. Now we'll look just briefly in Ezekiel 35. I need to get there. And it talks, different versions have different, they translate it a little bit differently, but it's a prophecy against Mount Seir. And in verse 5, it says, because you have harbored an ancient hostility, and other translations say an everlasting hatred, and delivered the Israelites over to the sword at the time of their calamity, the time their punishment reached its climax. Therefore, surely as I live, says the sovereign Lord, I will give you over to bloodshed, and it will pursue you. Since you did not hate bloodshed, bloodshed will pursue you. I will make Mount Seir a desolate waste and cut off from it all who come and go. I will fill your mountains with the slain, those killed by the sword, and will fall on your hills and your valleys and all the ravines. I will make you desolate forever. So there is, again, this everlasting enmity, this everlasting hatred, ancient hostility that works its way through history. Because you wonder, again, there always is racism against all kinds of people, but against the Jews, it's really a hatred against God and his sovereignty and his God has sovereignly chosen the Jews. And that will actually cross every life, especially as we come to the end of the age, because it seems like we grow up with an idea that everything should be fair, that all peoples are equal. And all peoples are equal under God, as far as, like, whatever nationality you are born into, you are a human being under God. But the Jews have been chosen as vessels to carry salvation to the world, to show the world who God is, and to out of the Jews, the Messiah comes. I mean, think about what happened. I mean, we can name innumerable events in Jewish history, but think about during the time of Jesus, and remember the Magi come because they've seen a star in the sky, proclaiming that basically a Messiah, will have been born, and they come looking for him. They want to pay homage to him. When Herod finds that out, he's like, well, who is it, and where is this person? And to remember, he goes and he has all of the kids that age murdered. I mean, that's a horrific act of almost an irrational act. Okay, like we're not just looking for, you know, we know to be the baby Jesus. We're going to kill everyone that could possibly be part of the salvation of Israel, and that murderous spirit is still it's still working its way through history, and it's going to come through. It's going to come to a crescendo as we reach the last days, and we're going to have to be prepared as believers to have to watch anti-Semitism reach a fever pitch, and really, who is going to stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters, but the church? You know, they have everyone is turning against them, and that will continue. And yet we have, and we'll speak more about that next week. We have our a duty as believers to stand with Israel. But let's look at some anti-Semitic things that have happened in Christian history, and we really need to know really the vitriol and the hatred of what has been spoken. Sue, in another session, had preached to us and taught to us on Romans 9 through 11, and the purpose of Romans is Paul is trying to already we have Gentile Christians coming to know the Lord, and we have Jewish people believing in the Messiah, and how are those two going to fit together? When it starts out, obviously all the believers are of Jewish heritage. They're coming to the Lord, and they're Jews, and then as Jesus, as the turnover happens, as Gentiles start to come, how do they fit in? How do they fit in? Well, as we work our way forward, there are the Messianic Jews really kind of they're competing against powerful things in the government, and powerful forces that are trying to diminish their worth, their voice, actually. So there, in the 400s, there is a preacher, John Chrysostom, and he writes, he's actually considered one of the best preachers of all time. He's called John the Golden Mouthed because his sermons were amazing. But unfortunately, he was preaching, he was going to preach against the Jews. So can you imagine having an orator who's very, very talented, but says absolutely like outrageous things? I'll read a little bit. I had asked you to read his treatise, and if you did, you would be again horrified. But there are, let me just get my notes here. Again, completely anti-Semitic things are being said, that Jews have rejected Jesus. They're not to be trusted. That the Jews now have no place. They've killed Christ, and there is God's going to punish them. And the church, the true believers, the church, are the people that God is now going to work with. He's going to, the Jews are a cursed people because of what happened. Now, I think it's interesting. By the time the Council of the Nicene Council comes in AD 325, and Emperor Constantine wants to solve some doctrinal problems. And I'm going to read a bit from Don Finto's book, Your People Shall Be My People, which is really, really good. He says, by the time of Origen, about the middle of the 3rd century, it is an accepted belief among most Christians that the destruction of Jerusalem and the dispersion of the Jews were God's method of showing the world that he was finished with them. They will never be restored to their former condition. This is what he's saying. For they have committed a crime of the most unhallowed kind in conspiring against the Savior of the human race. Origen wrote this in Against Celsus. What had happened to Romans 11? Did God reject his people? By no means. Did they stumble so as to fall beyond recovery? Not at all. And what about Jeremiah? Had Origen and others overlooked his prophecy that Israel would be a nation as long as the sun is in the sky? Jeremiah 31, 35 to 37. Did Jews alone conspire against the Savior? Was it not Pilate, a Gentile, who had gave his last word? And what about the Roman soldiers? Were they following orders? Yes, but actively involved in the Lord's arrest, torture, and crucifixion. Nonetheless, the church was not taking any chances. Constantine called the Nicene Council in AD 325. And by the way, there was not one Jew on that council, so that did not help to solve some of the problems. He wanted to make sure that the church had once and for all separated herself from these polluted wretches who had stained their hands with a nefarious crime. They needed a resurrection celebration date other than Passover. Passover was too Jewish. It appeared an unworthy thing that in the celebration of this most holy feast, we should follow the practice of the Jews, who have impiously defiled their hands with an enormous sin, and are therefore deservedly afflicted with blindness of soul, wrote Constantine to the assembled bishops in Nicaea. At the conclusion of the council meeting, Constantine had his way and celebrated with a huge church banquet. The Roman calendar had conquered. The annual celebration of the Lord's resurrection would now have a new name, Easter, strangely similar to Estra, the Teutonic goddess of spring, dissimilar to Pesach or Passover, the festival of its origin. God's calendar for the Passover was subjected to the Western Church from that point forward. So we see we see that there are really again no there are no Jewish believers incorporated into these discussions. So what's going to happen? You're going to vote the way you want it, and the emperor is going to get his way, and that it really comes down to, like, when people are in power and they don't like a certain group, they just come up with whatever arguments against them. But when it comes time to vote, their vote's going to win. So there, we come to the Spanish Inquisition, the time of King Dagobert in Spain in 629. And Sue had talked a little bit about this also, where Jews are made to choose between baptism and slavery. You're going to sign a waiver that says you're going to give up everything that you know about your heritage, which makes absolutely no sense. But the church has already started to become institutionalized and move away from its Jewish roots. From, it's already creating a divide away from really the ground of its being, and becoming something else. It's becoming like an institutionalized form, thinking that it has the truth, and now turning on the very people who were used to bring salvation. As we move into the time of the Crusades, as people often in the Crusades, a lot of the people went, well, we need to go back and take Jerusalem back from the hands of the enemy, the Muslim hordes or whatever. But as they moved through Europe, and they basically walked all the way, as they move through Europe, they're pillaging and burning down anything that's Jewish. So, I mean, it's how quickly things got, as they move through history, they get more and more distorted. And the narrative of where salvation comes from gets lost. And the Jews become scapegoats. In the 1500s, Martin Luther writes a treatise called On the Jews and Their Lies, and I had put that as part of the reading.
Mhm.
Absolutely, just horrendous anti-Semitic things. He says, burn down their synagogues and their schools, refuse to let Jews own a house anywhere near Christians, take away Jewish religious writings, forbid rabbis to preach, offer no protection to Jews on the highway, basically making them, you know, there's no way that they can even defend themselves. It's a precursor of what's going to happen in Nazi Germany. Now, what happens? Martin Luther is himself Jewish. I mean, I'm sorry, he's not Jewish. He's German. I'm sorry. Martin Luther is German, and he writes this against the Jews. And ironically, Hitler takes his writings and uses them to incite the German people to hate Jews. And so it's ironic that out of the mouth of a Christian preacher who brought us to the truths of the Reformation, also brought us to an absolutely destructive mindset toward the Jews that is then used again by this evil spirit working its way through history. I mean, obviously we know that like Hitler is demon possessed, and his hatred for the Jews is part of that possession. It's part of the devil's plan to wipe out the Jewish race. And he takes that, and it's if you watch the his preaching, you see him almost become completely possessed when Hitler's preaching, especially like at Nuremberg. Um, the, his impassioned speeches. How are you going to get a whole nation to hate the Jews and then kill them? He blames the Jews for Germany losing the war, and he expounds on that and says that they're less than they're not the kind of people that the Aryan race is superior, and that they're not the kind of people. They're kind of the kinds of people that you want to exterminate in order to make your society healthy. And this is all coming from he's using the preaching of Martin Luther to substantiate that. So I want to talk a little bit about like where does this, obviously it's coming from the devil, but what does it attach to in people that they want to say these things against the Jews? Martin Luther started out 20 years before he wrote On the Jews and Their Lies. He said, it's the duty of Christians to go and convert them. We need to go and convert them. It's our job to preach to them. It's our job to love them. It's our job to stand with them. 20 years later, he is coming out with the most horrendous hate speech. Let's kill them. Let's take all the rights away from them. Because they did not, I mean, understandably so, they did not respond to uh, the pleas of Christians to turn and be converted. But think about it, would you? Would you, he was expecting that, and when that didn't happen, he like throws a fit. It's very emotional. And he writes on the Jews and their lies out of that emotion and out of, I mean, I couldn't find the quote, but there's a famous quote that says, most of the important decisions made by rulers in sort of like history itself um, are made for not these grandiose reasons, but for very emotional reasons. Martin Luther lost his daughter the year before he writes this. And a lot of anti-Semitism again comes out of our hearts. It comes out of hate speech. It comes out of frustration, wanting to blame somebody. And the Jews have been historically blamed for outrageous things that they couldn't possibly have done. Or what has happened has been twisted. Like as what I was reading from Don Finto's book, it wasn't just the Jews that killed Jesus. Rome was involved. Pilate was involved. And actually, if we separate ourselves from the Jews and say those Jews killed Jesus, then we're not really understanding our own hearts. We're not understanding that, what if we were there, the depths of our own hearts. I'm not saying that everyone would have um, shouted, let's kill Jesus and say Barabbas, but we need to at least look at the fact that all human hearts have that capability, and to set ourselves up in pride is one of the things that I want to suggest that we cannot do, because it's easy to point fingers and say, if I had been there, it would have been a different thing. But if I had been there, I don't know that it would have been a different thing. And yes, we can say, like we love the Lord, but think about before you knew the Lord. Think about your heart and where it might have been. And we are grafted. We are the Commonwealth of Israel. We're grafted into Israel, and because what God has done through the Jews has opened the door for us. We should see that with the utmost humility. We really need to guard our hearts. There are one of the things that we can do to there are a number of things that I'm going to suggest that we can do to stand with the Jewish people, but there are a lot of things said about the Jews that are really conspiracy theories, and we really cannot afford to support if we hear conspiracy theories and they're still going strong. And I'll actually give you a couple of them. God was punishing Jews for killing Christ. Jews used the blood of Christian children for rituals. Jews serve the Antichrist by not converting to Jesus. Jews infiltrated communist groups with that Zionist thoughts. So that would especially like be during the time of um, uh, when communism was in Russia was a thing. There were many uh, Jewish people there, and they were accused of infiltrating to promote Zionism. Um, and this one is still really, really strong. Jews ruled the banking systems and have a plan for world domination. Now, could it be that um, instead of that being something that God has cursed, that God has cursed them. If God has cursed them, why are they so prosperous? And why are we so jealous of that? Like, it's like perhaps the fact that they, while they don't acknowledge Jesus, they acknowledge the law and they live their lives in such a way that um, they're able to, God blesses them. They're able to um, be prosperous. Um, and yet people that don't like that are going to say, well, this must be a conspiracy. Well, perhaps it was because they lived properly and studied and, you know, God bless them rather than, like, wow, there's a conspiracy. If God hated them so much, he wouldn't let them like rise to these positions. So that, um, it's a circular reasoning that goes nowhere. Um, but on the other hand, Jews are an inferior, what is said is, on the other hand, Jews are an inferior race and evil and stupid and have the mentality of pigs. Well, it can't be both, right? You can't go both ways with it. Um, so I also think that this has some really good information in it. It's Michael Brown's book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood. It explores a lot of Christian and just anti-Semitism in general. I think today, um, like one of the things that I wanted us to talk about was, uh, and I gave that little clip by Eric McTaxis, Derek Bonhoeffer warning the church of what was happening and the church not paying attention. And we're really in that very same situation now. We're coming to a place where the church is going to have to decide anew to stand with the Jews. And um, I, you know, I, you know, some of us, have stood on the street corner holding up banners supporting Israel, and you see many people supportive of that. But you can also see that the people that maybe drive by and are not supportive of it, how quickly they might turn violent against you. And we tend to shy away from that and think it's not our problem. Um, Betsy and I had gone to a dinner with some Jewish people, and I listened carefully to what was being said, and we said we were there to just let let people know that we're standing with you. And one of the ladies, who was actually a convert to Judaism, said um, that she had had like an interaction with someone, and someone had said something pretty, it wasn't a horrible thing. It was like, we're sorry for what is happening to you. And um, she took kind of like offense to that, and because it was like, it was separating. It was like there was no
Mhm.
solidarity in that. There was no, hey, we're all in this together and we are going to stand with you. And perhaps the person that said that was very well meaning. I'm sure they were. But for us to support the Jews, they have to realize that we're not looking at them, we're not looking down at them. We are not Jews, we're believers in Jesus, but we have to be willing to lay our lives down. We have to say, no, we're going to stand with you, and they have to know we'll stand with them to the very end. So even things like, and this is a side route I won't go down, but we'll be looking at it next week. The church will be here during difficult times because we the Lord needs us to stand during in the hour of trouble that the Jews will endure in the future. The Lord needs us to stand, and we need to know how to do that. We need to be, number one, we need to be biblically literate, and we are not quite biblically literate. We have a mishmash of beliefs. So we really need to look at the scriptures to know that God's covenant, that God has not forsaken the Jews, that is covenant with them is an everlasting one based on his faithfulness, not even on theirs. And that he will bring them back to himself. And we need to know that, and not we need to have respectful conversations with people that don't believe that. Our brothers and sisters, even in the Lord, who do not believe that, who believe that God is done with the Jews. So it's very important that we and even in these 6 classes, it's just touching the surface. There's almost like so much to be said that I can only, that we as the teachers can only pique your interest, because it will take hours of looking at the scriptures and hours of understanding what has happened historically to really do this justice. But we've got to start somewhere. Number 2, we can't support prejudicial statements or conspiracy theories. We need to speak up when we hear them. Number 3, we need to honor the Jews, but realize that they are not perfect. Not any singular Jewish person speaks for their whole nation. So, you're going to hear there are all different kinds of Jewish people. They're all going to have all different kinds of crazy ideas or good ideas or biblical ideas. Some of them will have biblical ideas. Some of them will have crazy ideas. Some of them are liberal. Some of them are conservative. You don't judge a whole group of people based on your neighbor who you're talking to over the fence who's saying wild things. We have to differentiate between, you know, that the Jewish nation is very diverse, and we can't make a judgment and say, just as we can't do that, if you talk to when I go overseas, people, I'm like, okay, you're the American, tell us what you believe politically. Well, what I believe politically is just me believing something politically. It's not it I don't speak for my whole nation, because there'd be as many people in the nation, there'd be that many ideas of what they believe politically. So it is like, and we can't blame individual Jewish people for the actions of the Jewish government, which may be good or may not be good. There may be things that, like, to support the Jewish people is not to support everything they do, or not to agree with even everything that they say or do, but to stand with them because God is standing with them. And God, I believe, will show us, but we have to be people of prayer. We have to be praying for them. I mean, that is a major way of supporting them, is to really be prayerful and say, Lord, show me your heart. Like, what as we wait with you for the day that you redeem Israel completely, what does that, what can I do? You know, because the veil is still there over the eyes of um, of the Jewish people. And all we can do is pray that that veil will be lifted. But while we're in that process where the veil is still there, we can sow seeds. We can be good. We can establish friendships. Um, because who knows that your job in the future might be to um, take in one Jewish person. You know, think about let's go back to the church during the rise of Nazism. Again, like I said, we are at that very junction, um, and the same things are happening. And it's, you know, we want to encourage our pastors to preach to us, to preach strong words to us, to encourage us to not let evil. If we just turn our face and don't start to address the evil things that are happening, then evil will just keep pushing forward. And the only people that are going to push back are the people that know God and know his heart. And that's us. That's us. Um, can you imagine being Jewish and knowing that no one stands with you, or feeling that no one stands with you? Like, I think it definitely makes a difference. Um, to and again, we have to be wise. We have to be prayerful. If we don't want to pick fights um, unless we're led to confront. We need to be wise about that. Um, I think about I've had the opportunity to visit the Corrie Ten Boom house twice in the last year, and I feel like that God specifically wanted me to see that and sit in her living room where a prayer meeting for the Jews had gone on for decades. These were just ordinary people, but they knew the scriptures in a time when their churches wouldn't necessarily have been preaching that, but somehow they read the scriptures. They were simple people who read the scriptures, and they were praying decades before the Holocaust happened. So when it started to happen, it wasn't a question to them whether they would help. They found a way to help, and they were just, I mean, think about it, they were just this ordinary family, um, you know, older women who said, no, we will help, we will do what it takes to help the Jews. And you know the story. They ended up in a concentration camp because of it. And we need to have that same um, commitment, that same level of commitment. And we need to know why we have that commitment, because if push comes to shove and we are also persecuted with them, we need to be able to inwardly stand. We need to have the word of God in us and to know that we've done the right thing. We've done our duty. You know, what does Jesus say? Really that really difficult thing that Jesus says, after you've done everything that you should do, you should say we are worthless servants. I mean, like, really? Like, I've done everything I need to do, and then I should say I'm a worthless servant? But this is what Jesus teaches us. Do you know what I mean? He's like, do not this is what is expected of you. This is our there's that beautiful and let's read it from the beautiful response that really should be our response from the book of Ruth. Well, we'll start with 15. Look, Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, and she stopped urging her. And that really needs to be our heart, to go, and to not turn back, even to die with, the with with the people that who are God's people, and we are part of that. We are the commonwealth of Israel. We are the we're really like the fruit of all of, in a sense, we're a fruit of all of the suffering that the Jews have endured. We are, when God opened the gates to the Gentiles, um, Romans says that, if salvation came through, the Jews not recognizing Jesus, think about what kind of salvation will come when they do. Think of what will open up. So we really owe everything to the Jews, even when they do not currently, as a people, recognize Jesus. We don't hate them for that. We don't divorce ourselves from them for that. We stand with God, and we watch and we pray, and we do the best we can to come against the untruths, and to really make up for a history that has included a lot of anti-Semitic thought. So I think that, just my closing remarks, I think that what we need to be, we need to listen carefully to what people say. We need to listen carefully to what is preached from our pulpits, and take it back to Scripture, to compare what is said. When we hear anti-Semitic things said by our neighbors or our relatives, I mean, we'll be coming, to Easter is coming up, Passover is coming up. However Christians celebrate that, there may be talk of anti-Semitic things coming up at our family meals, and we want to be prepared to say, that's, wait a minute, that's not true. There's so much, part of the current anti-Semitism comes through the TV set, or the radio, where Israel is made to look bad for defending herself. Israel is, I have a degree in journalism, and how you say what you say definitely affects, like, how the reader is not necessarily going to be thinking, what am I, the writer, saying? But the writer can put their opinion into it. Michael Brown does really well with covering that aspect about, like, how does the news report? And you hear, I mean, you listen to something like Al Jazeera report the news, and it's like, wow, is that what happened? They slant it in such a way that it makes Israelis or Jewish people look like barbarians. But there's always the other, there's always the other side of what needs to, the truth can be very much manipulated, um, and is being manipulated at this point, especially amongst college students. So if you have a college student, I behoove you to really study what is being said to them, because I mean, most of us are older and they're going to say, oh, you don't know. Yeah, you don't know what you're talking about. We better know what we're talking about. And we better realize that the Holocaust was a real thing, because part of anti-Semitic thought was that the Holocaust never happened. And to write that out of history. Um, the, you know, the Holocaust, the actual Holocaust survivors that actually have the tattoos on them, they're getting very old and very few in number. And, part of what we need to do is not let that horrible time be written out of history. So I want to close with that, but there's much that we can do, even as individual people, to stand against the anti-Semitism that's rising, and it's really our duty. So.